Never had my dad, but I found him on the internet, on a YouTube, as a contestant on the TV quiz show To Tell the Truth in 1961. Imagine my surprise.
Conversations with Indie Authors.
Hello and welcome to another captivating episode of the Zarlequan podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Starr, and today I have the immense pleasure of introducing you to a man who has been deeply immersed in the world of music, culture, and the performing arts. Our guest has worn many hats over the years, from music and cultural observation to a nearly 40-year career in public relations, nonprofit development, and the performing arts. He's interviewed legendary artists, worked in an addiction recovery during the opioid crisis, and even taught a senior writing course at Temple University. Today, we're stepping into the life and experiences of Keith Mason. He's an author with a remarkable tale to share, one he never anticipated living, let alone writing about. Please welcome Keith Mason to the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that pretty accurate description of what I've done in the last year. 45 years. You lose track sometimes. It's only when I hear it back from somebody like you that, oh, geez, so that's what's happened for the last half century of my life.
What was the best part?
Well, there have been a couple of best parts in terms of my being in nonprofit public relations and communications and development, etc. I spent 8 years, like you mentioned, in an addiction recovery network around Philadelphia as their communications person. I would have these moments every so often when some staff person would come up and say, "Oh, just brought in Mr. Smith for treatment. His family came in." And he mentioned that he saw the piece on our organization last night on Action News, which is something that I'd set up. And that kind of thing is worth getting up in the morning for, to have an effect on somebody's life. So that was a proud 8 years during that whole thing. Now, how that stacks up with what I did when I was in my 20s, that experience versus hanging around with Jerry Garcia or all these other names I could drop if I wanted to talk about rock and roll, which was the most fun, which was the most whatever. Well, they each had their place.
You have had the opportunity to interview some truly iconic people. Can you give us a little highlights? And what was one of the most moving moments?
Well, we're going back to the 70s, so depending on your audience, it will make sense or it'll be, is that somebody, on MTV late Saturday night, Where Are They Now shows. Uh, when I was in my 20s, I was one of those people. I got to be one of those guys. You look at what were called the underground newspapers or the pre-MTV goings on, and if you remember the guy from high school who didn't mix it up in the room and wasn't drinking beer out of soda cans and trying to make out with somebody and all that. Instead, was over in the corner just going through all the liner notes on the record albums. That this was the guy. Um, so doing something in the university newspaper and sending it off to one of the underground newspapers, the alternative papers in Philadelphia. Back when you got your news and your information and your perspective on your culture from the papers and some radio stations, not from looking at your telephone. Uh, Setting the stuff off. Hey, kid, how'd you like to do this? Okay, fine, I'll do this. And you work your way up and you get the opportunities and you find yourself in a hotel with Jerry Garcia. You find yourself in a hotel hell room after the show with his Grateful Dead mate, Bob Weir. Well, you've got a raging molar infection that's going to make you fall on the floor, but you got to go for the story. Hanging around backstages of theaters and arenas and TV shows, and you just end up bumping into all kinds of people. You pursue them. They want to talk about the record. They want to talk about the tour. They want to talk about what's going on, and they have to talk to somebody. And I got to be one of the guys who did it, and doing rock and roll, etc. I wanted to specialize in doing stuff that nobody was familiar with. I wanted to go after artists and bands that not a lot of people knew about. For me, being with people just on the come up as I was, being with some folk singer that you didn't know about, as opposed to being with Paul McCartney or whatever. Okay, you're going to make your choices. Fine. Some things were more essential, more important than others, landmark things. But I got enough of the little people. I got enough of the people on the way up, and I got enough of the people who were at the top of the game, and finding things again that nobody ever heard about. Nobody knew about Monty Python until we started pushing them in the States. I got to have a small inroad, a ridiculously small inroad. Don't want to get too bragging here like I'm somebody's manager. I'm just a guy who was in Philadelphia when some band passes through, or somebody that you can catch on the phone. You spend a couple of hours with somebody in some backstage situation or some hotel situation or just romping around the street situation. They're all just regular people who happen to have a new hit record out that they wanted to talk about, but they're all just regular people. And I asked them regular people questions. And I had this fun era in my life that came out of being the editor of the high school paper and the rock and roll editor of the college paper, and on into the alternative paper in Philadelphia and into doing some radio stuff. And that tripped me into public relations for a small cutting edge theater. Writing my book came to me totally by accident, but if I'd been a writer for 45 years. This thing happened to me. If I didn't write about this thing that happened to me, it would have been a dereliction of duty. So when this thing happened, I wasn't some unprepared guy with no skill sets and no ideas of where to go with it. I knew exactly where to go with it. It tugged me along. I wasn't steering the sleigh. The dogs were pulling me in, but at least I was ready for it.
You sound like a man after my own heart. Can you tell us a little bit more about your memoir?
It was something that happened to me. Other people make a commitment. Well, I've got a story to tell, or I've got some celebrity, or I've got some insight on life, and it turns into, oh, here's my life story. Other people have memoir thrust upon them, and that was the case for me. I'm 72 now. When I was 64, on an October night, much like the one that I'm in now with you as we do our exchange, I had been fiddling around a bit on the internet, sort of looking, but not really looking. There's a long backstory here, but thinking about somebody who should have been a part of my life, but wasn't. Somebody who cut me out of his life before I was born, actually. But I'm 64 years old and I'm putzing around, and I came across the father I have never known. Well, the internet has everything. Lots of people go searching every day and night for their roots and their ancestries, and they're spitting into DNA tubes and doing all that kind of thing. It's a hugely popular human search going on these days. And never had my dad, but I found him on the internet, on a YouTube, as a contestant on the TV quiz show To Tell the Truth in 1961. Imagine my surprise. That took me into a voyage that brought me his entire sociopathic life. He was married 7 times to 6 women, 5 months to my mom. I found 8 siblings that I never knew about. One was a retired honored homicide cop in Akron, Ohio. Another guy had been living an hour away from me, 20 miles outside of Philadelphia for the last 20 years. We could have cursed at each other in the parking lot at the King of Prussia Mall or a parking space. I have no idea. I found my grandfather. My grandfather was a crusading reporter who was murdered in the dusty streets of a small town called Alice, Texas in 1949 by a corrupt sheriff who didn't like the way Wild Bill Mason was poking his nose into all sorts of local Texas scandals, including a vote counting scandal that propelled a young fellow into the Senate, a fellow by the name of Lyndon Baines Johnson, who later White Housed himself. So here are these 3 generations of men and sons and brothers who never knew anything about each other. I ended up self-publishing Please Stand Up, poster behind me, title in front of me, which, if you don't mind, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Go to my website at www.pleasestandupmason.com, and you can just push a button and buy from there. So I spent the last 6 years living this and writing about it at the same time. I'm still writing about it because I'm still a PR man. I'm still doing stuff. I've been working for the last 7 months on a screenplay, which is strictly on spec, but that's just a separate project. We'll see where it goes. But as they say about all the best vacations, it's the journey, not getting there. For somebody who's been writing books all their life while doing something like this, well, that's just the normal course of things. For somebody who's never done anything like that before, whose longest anything might have been 300 words of the CEO's statement in the annual report, to now end up with 99,000 words and a 230-page work of literature. It's been.
I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much, Keith Mason, everyone.
Thank you again. It's been a real pleasure.
My friends, if you found today's episode as inspiring as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Your support keeps us going and helps us share these remarkable stories. As we wrap up, remember that life is a tapestry of experiences just waiting for you to explore. We'll be back with more engaging conversations, so stay tuned and stay inspired. I'm your host, Brittany Starr, and until next time, keep embracing the journey and creating your own unique story. And remember to stay magical, my friends.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening episode of the Zarlequan podcast. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss a beat.